Hey fellow musicians and engineers, this is just a short recap of how I handled the live recording of a 17-piece jazz big band and also many smaller ensembles of the same players. The band is the Strictly Smokin Big Band, and you can find out more about them in the description below this video. It was a really long one-day session on location in a theatre, including a video crew as well for a show reel. Luckily we had some time the night before to set up gear as well. So let's get stuck in. Pre-production begins with picking up the Behringer X32 desk I hired to do the heavy lifting in terms of the tracking for this session. For me, this is the easiest way to capture 32 channels without having a whole rack of stuff to bring to the session as well. It was a convenient option also because the vocalists who were on IEMs needed a mix sent to them as well, so they could record vocals without needing a PA in the room. We also ended up with one monitor speaker being used for the keyboard player. Apart from that, no other outputs of the desk were used, and my Pro Tools return came back to the headphones of the unit. Dead easy. There's a few things you can do to make the session run smooth, even before you get there. The first app I would recommend is X32 Edit for the Behringer desk. This lets you control the desk remotely through an Ethernet cable. I can name the tracks, color code them, make the stereo pairs, and set any other settings that might be a good starting point for each channel here. You can also control global desk settings, pretty much anything actually. It's really best for naming tracks. Entering characters on the X32 is cumbersome. Once the desk is set up correctly, I move over to Pro Tools and check everything about the XUF audio interface, which is part of the X32. The first problem to show up is that Pro Tools only supports set buffer settings, none of which appear in the XUF software. You have to aim just slightly lower than one of the Pro Tools settings and then it rounds it up. I've gone for 1024 buffer. I have no reason for the low latency when tracking live. I can monitor single channels through the desk for noise or problems, and it's only a USB 2.0 interface. And after trusting RME's rock-solid PCIe drivers for so many years, I won't trust capturing any one-time event over USB without a high buffer setting, especially on a little laptop with Pro Tools. I would normally consider Reaper for such tasks, with its much more stable CPU handling, but because of the huge scale of the session, I needed to have the recordings ready in Pro Tools to begin editing and comping straight away after we were finished. With so much at stake, you should definitely stress test the system before the day of the session. 17 musicians, a video crew, that's a lot of people to keep waiting if something like Pro Tools shits the bed. Honestly, that is the weakest point of the system, so I ran a record test for 2 hours straight, recording to an external USB 3.0 hard drive. I later noticed that the internal SSD had much faster timeline speeds in Pro Tools, and although recording to the system drive isn't recommended, it was way outperforming the external hard drive. For the first few minutes, I took a simple SM58 and tested every XLR socket on the desk, making sure it made it through to Pro Tools. The test worked perfectly, but just to make things worse, a Windows 10 update was due the next day. So after running that and having to reinstall iLok drivers of course, I had to do the stress test again. There's also work we can put into the Pro Tools session, the standard stuff before we actually start. Naming tracks, colouring them, grouping them. Also for this session, I used the comments box to remind me what microphones were being used for each source and any other settings I was going to have to remember. Finally, for ease of use, I pack a second screen and a Bluetooth mouse. Because using a trackpad, it's like having an arm cut off. I hate it, so definitely took those with me. Once we were all happy with the setup, there was only one thing left to do: Curry House. The start time for the session was 8 AM. Like, kill me now, I didn't get into this job to be up early in the morning if I could help it. So after a coffee, some changes had to be made. I was personally after an ambient mic per group of Hornz as well, but because of the setup of the stage, it was very tight and the video was the priority. This wasn't as practical. So instead we went for a single room mic a few feet away from the entire horn section to capture some of that real air movement. We also had to add a monitor speaker for the keyboard player to hear his performance, and had a small fight with an old multi-core. 6 was 9, 9 was 6, and 4 of the channels were numbered backwards. Luckily a classic scratch test got that all sorted pretty quick. More vocalists showed up during the day, requiring a quick setup of more IEMs and mics, but this was fairly simple. The only thing that made it difficult was my own messiness. I've never been the neatest engineer, and it was a true rat's nest of leads once we were all set up, especially right by me. I'm really lucky to have some great assistants in the large recording studios that I work at, and those guys are always so neat and tidy. So when I'm on my own, it's always a total mess. I was also crammed into a little corner to stay out the shot of the video, which made it a little bit worse. The lineup of the recording was, to be honest, gargantuan. Here you can see all the lineups and all the songs. Most were taken about 3 times, allowing us the ability for edits and comps if needed. We started with the biggest lineup and subtracted people as we went. This worked a treat and we managed to get it all done in the allotted time, including about 5 more extra performances of soloists and duos at the end. After tracking was finished, all that was left to do was pack down, and then the curry house. So welcome to the Pro Tools session here. This is the one for the big band, which was the biggest lineup. All the horns, all the players, all the vocalists. And you can see along the top here, I've got my markers for my different tracks. And then if we go to playlist view, you can see how I've used different playlists for different takes. Boom, there we go. It just works a little bit like that. So first up, we've got our kick drum. Let's give that a listen. Take off all this stuff so far. So that's just this, what, a Red 5 kick. So the Red 5 drum mic set is literally just one of those cheapy Chinese drum kit sets. And it's fine for me for the kick drum. You can hear the EQ is pretty drastic, because for the big band sound, we don't really need sort of like a bright top end that we might want in like a modern track. So we've scooped out a lot of crap in the middle. And I also haven't boosted the top in the same way that I normally would with, for instance, like a pop or rock track. Then we've got a gate. Cleans it up a little bit more. And then we've also got a limiter there as well, just to really sort of keep that in line, especially when he really digs into it. Easy. Right, snare top. Again, a clip-on Red 5 microphone. A little bit of compression, what we got there. Really slight compression, pretty much nothing. No gate on this one. Again, for jazz, big band stuff, it's too much. You can't gate the snare, really. It just doesn't sound very good. Snare bottom in there as well. And this says Studio Spares Boundary Mic. So this, I've spoke about this in my other drum videos. Really good tip. It's just a boundary microphone placed on the floor, facing up to the bottom of, like, the under snare. It's looking up at the underside of the snare. And you get that really, you know, you really get a good sound of the snares. You also get a little bit of kick drum sort of attack as well, but I don't mind that being in there. Good. Next, we've got a rack tom. Let's give that a listen. Standard stuff. It's not even EQ'd yet. It's literally just the track as it is. So I'll be looking at that later. Here we've got some floor tom. That one I have gated, and I've got a bit of our bass on it, so I must have thought it was lacking a little something. There's the out, not even doing anything. Overheads. So this says Red 5 overheads, but it isn't. I actually swapped them out for NT55s, which are these little Rode pencil microphones, and they were in an XY configuration just over the drummer's head. It's all about saving space and mic stands, so I've got a Wilkinson Audio clip that will allow me to put those two microphones in an XY configuration with only one stand, and that's what I used above the drummer. So let's give that a listen. You see, it gets a really nice overall sound of the drums. Because it's XY as well, I also sort of angled them in a way that one was sort of pointing at the hi-hats and the other one was pointing at the ride, because really they're the two main elements of the overheads that we need to get the drum mix sounding nice. And what have we got on here? Auto align. So yeah, I've actually auto aligned all of the close drum mics to the overheads, I think. Send one, and then the rest are on receive. Yeah, so floor tom, rack tom, snare top, and not on the kick. But all that combined just gives us a stronger drum sound. So let's listen to the drums soloed. Good, you know, I like it that the bottom is sort of pumping along nicely, and the you know, the overheads have worked really nicely. There's obviously a lot of bleed. It's a band, they played live, there's going to be bleed. Excellent. So on the drum bus at the moment, all I've got is this TG12345. I really love this compressor on drums. Let's bypass that. I guess technically it's sort of like a parallel compression, this mix knob here, down at about 40%. And it just gives the drums a little bit more body. I'm not doing any EQ on there at the moment. That could come soon. And then after that, we've got a bit of Kramer tape, which is just, I like to put tape on a lot of things, and especially for a big band sound, you know, there's Kramer tape on the drum bus. There is, I think there's a Kramer tape on the other buses as we go through, and also on the master fader. It just helps give it that more vintage sound of a big band, you know, a little bit of dirt and grit just tucked into each track. Does have a good like cumulative effect and creates like a nice mix. Bass. Direct XLR, let's give that a listen. Bit of compression. Fast attack, slow release, just to really clamp down on it. And there's a little bit of EQ there. Boosting this sort of warmth of the bass and cutting off a little bit of the top end, sort of finger scratchy noises and things like that. Could go with a cabinet simulator on that as well, but at the moment, sounds good. Here we've got a guitar which was DI'd. This I have put a cabinet simulator on. So let's listen to it totally bypassed. It's just, it definitely needs a cabinet simulator on it. It just sounds a little bit, I don't even know what the word is, like plasticky and cheap and just very direct sound, which doesn't really mesh very well. So we've got a little bit of EQ here, cutting out some tubbiness, a little bit of brightness, 2.4K. And then we've got this cabinet simulator, which just makes it all sound a little bit more real. Can actually hear a bit of bleed of the band in there as well. So that could be the pickups of the guitar. I think it's like a hollow body thing. But again, I probably wouldn't mess with the gate. You know, the more gates you do, the more you've got to keep on top of them and stuff, and it's really not that big of a problem. Stereo DI of the keys. And then we've got a TG12345 again. Again, the compressor just really puts some life into that keyboard. And then I've got some EQ on as well, a little bit up top. And then a cut of about, what was this, 500 hertz. So I'm just cutting that region out and boosting the top just to give it some space in the mix. There's a lot of horns. So it's more of like a pop approach really to make that piano super bright, but when you're battling with a lot of horns, I feel like that helps it sit in the mix quite well as well. The fellow once said, ain't that a kick? Lovely. Right, now we're into horn territory, so let's see what we've got. Let's listen to the saxes first. We've got Bari, alto. This one's just labelled sax or clarinet. Don't know what sax it was. Tenor and another tenor. Good. So on each of these tracks, we do have gates set for them, with also sidechain EQ to stop it being mis-triggered by other instruments. A little bit of a higher hold as well to stop fade-outs of notes being cut off. There's no EQ on that track in particular. Just a gate for that one as well. But this one has got some EQ on it. If you take the EQ out, I don't know what it is about this track and this microphone, but that's really bright. It's got that sort of brittleness to it. So we're just giving it a little bit more body. And that, for me, is cutting away some of that brittleness, sort of honky plastic sound away from that mic as well. Tenor there sounds fine, no EQ on that. And then we've got another tenor here. A little bit of compression there, mainly there for the makeup gain, just so that it matches the others in terms of volume. Just so then I don't have to keep going around and messing with clip gain, because there's going to be multiple playlists. And I know I'll have just kept the gains the same through the whole tracking process, so I'd rather bring up some gain just using this compressor, basically. It's just an easier way for me to work. So all of these saxophones come through to a bus. Again, a general EQ. Bringing out some more body for those horns, just because everything's close mic'd. And close micing tends to just sound brighter in general. I just want to bring out some of that body in those horns there. And then another TG 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I love this thing, man. It's so good. I take it off. Again, just a bit of compression. There's no EQ on that bus yet, but that's probably going to come soon. So the saxes go through to the all horns bus. But before that, we've got other things to look at. So let's look at trombones. Just a gate on that, there's no EQ yet. It's got that nice rasp. I do like that raspiness. This one here. Lovely. That's this one. No EQ on this one either. I like it. That one's great as well. I think the trombones have worked really well. You know, the close mic on the trombone seems to really actually get a nice sound for them. What have we got on the master bus? So we've got quite a bottom boost there. And a little bit of treble cut at the top as well. Again, just to make them a bit bassier, I think. It's quite a lot of bass. Maybe I'll end up cutting that. So let's look at the trumpets, the last group of horns. Good. So you'll find in the big band arrangement that the trumpets overpower pretty much everything. If any track has bleed on, it's the bleed of the trumpets. So there's no EQ on any of these yet, just gates so far. Lovely. So these trumpets all come again together to their own bus, where again we've got another TG 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And on this bus we tend to just have, what have I got so far? A little bit of bass removed. And that's it so far. Again, because everything's been close mic'd, I think they were with these sort of T-bone microphones. These, I think they're from Toman.de, just, you know, cheap condensers, basically, one per person. And the brief of the production was, you know, tight and commercial. It gives us a very powerful sound for the horns, but it can tend to get quite bright. So that's why I haven't boosted the top end, especially on the trumpets, because they're close mic'd and they're all over everything else. They bleed into everyone. So all that adds up to be quite intense. So all of the horns come through together to this. We've got an all horns bus here. So I've got some multi-band dynamics. And then we've got a limiter. Really just shaving a couple of dB off the top for the peaks. And then we've got like an overall EQ. So again, just cutting away just the bottom. There's not really that much information in this sort of, you know, from 200 hertz down. So I've cut that out, which will allow us to get a clearer sort of bass and kick drum sound. And then we've got a 3 dB sort of shelf at the top from 2K all the way up. That's to give us the brightness on the entire horns group rather than going through and, you know, just tweaking the trumpets, which are already quite bright. This overall, it just tends to sound a bit nicer to treat the entire group of horns as one thing and EQ it there. And then concert hall reverb. Love it. That makes a really good difference. Just helps it sound a bit more live. It's very short, 1.4. I think that's, you know, quite short for a hall. No other special settings. 20% mix, you know, there's only a little sprinkle of that sound in there. And then again, Kramer tape, just like the rest of them. It looks like default settings, flux fairly low. I haven't touched the wow and flutter, I've just left that as it is. I'm trying to think if there's a time where I wouldn't use wow and flutter. I think maybe for like vocals, I don't want them to sound out of tune. But in general, tend to keep them there. Okay, we're almost done looking at all these tracks. Let's take a little peek at the vocals. So here we've got male vocals, and let's just listen to the source. No plugins. So the first thing is there's a shit ton of bleed.
How lucky could one guy be? I kissed her and she kissed me. Like the fella once said, ain't that a kick in the head? The room was completely black. I hugged her and she hugged back.
With this male singer in general, it's not too bad at all, really. It sounds very bleedy, but once it's in, it doesn't seem to have too much of an effect on the sound of the horns.
A hole in the bone.
In terms of plugins, we've just got an EQ.
A hole in the bone.
Stuff, cutting some mud, cutting bottom, little boost in the middle, little boost in the top.
The fella once said, ain't that a kick in the head?
A little bit of compression. And then the limiter is doing most of the heavy lifting in terms of bringing that vocal up and making it a bit more present.
The sailor said, quo, ain't that a hole in the bone?
And then a little bit of reverb on the end.
My head keeps spinning.
So that's our track there with the male vocals. Let's take a little look at a female vocal track for see the difference in microphones. So here we are at the female vocal, and again, to sort of stop the sound of the bleed sort of you know, getting in the way of the horns. I've literally just faded the track in and out as best I can. So I'm going to undo that edit briefly, and let's have a listen to how it sounds. Especially when there's a solo horn playing, it really, you know, it puts a lot of room on that sound that I'm not massive on. So if we go to where the vocal comes in, let's have a listen.
Forget your troubles, come on, get happy. We're gonna chase all your cares away. Shout hallelujah, come on, get happy. Get ready, get ready for the judgment day.
Especially there when the trumpets are kicking off at the end, it just doesn't sound as clear as I would like it to be. So we do have a little secret weapon we can use to help with this, and that's in the form of iZotope RX D-Bleed, because luckily my last track down here is that one room mic, and that actually makes for the perfect source to help us denoise these vocals. So next we're going to have a little peek in iZotope RX and see what we can do about that bleed. So this is where I got really surprised. The D-Bleed tool in RX7 actually didn't hold a candle to the new music rebalance tool, which did a really, really good job of pulling the vocals up away from the background noise of the band. Here I am sort of messing around in RX with the D-Bleed tool, but really the results weren't as great as I expected. I actually did a test run a couple of days before this, which worked really well, but going back to the recordings now, I just can't seem to get it to sound as good. Reasons could include the singers moving around the room, so the phase relationship between the mics is constantly in flux, which I think doesn't help the algorithm figure out what's going on. So let's have a little listen to before and after of D-Bleed, and then we're going to have a little listen of before and after with music rebalance, which was loads better.
Ooh, for the judgment day. Judgment day.
So here I am messing with the music rebalance settings in RX7, and to me, this really helps with the bleed a lot more. It gets rid of all that trashy sort of sound you get from the bleed of the drums and the horns, and gives you a really crisp vocal. You may find when you listen to the track soloed, you can hear some artifacts, but when you bring it in with the main mix, it actually blends really well. And what I've decided to do in the end is use a combination of all three techniques. Sometimes it's the raw mic, sometimes it's denoised, and sometimes it's rebalanced. And through a combination of all three, I'm able to get a really crisp vocal on all the tracks.
When he was 17, when he was 17, it was a very good year. Was a very good year for small town girls. Soft summer nights.
The next stage in the process is to export rough takes for the video guy, and I have to be careful that the lengths of the files that I will send him in the future don't change, so that he can just replace his mixes in his video session with the master files once they're finished. Let's just give a listen to the fully raw files from the day of tracking and the end result. We're going to listen to two different types of lineup. The first one will be the big band, and the second one will be the pop band.
Forget your troubles, come on, get happy. We're gonna chase all your cares away. Shout hallelujah, come on, get happy. Get ready, get ready, get ready for the judgment day.
Treasure, that is what you are.
make my wish come true. If you let me treasure you, if you let me treasure you, oh, oh.
Let's take a quick look at the mastering process for these tracks. It's really nothing crazy. It's simply Isotope Ozone 7, which I've used for a while now, and then Isotope Insight to check the volume of the track. I tend to aim for about -8 LUFS. There's just no need for it to be any louder. It just starts to sound crap. I don't want to hear any artifacts from heavy limiting or straight up distortion. This is one of the loudest tracks of the entire session, so I've used this as an example to show sort of my limit. You don't want to be killing the entire dynamic of the big band by overcompressing.
Wonderful you, it had to be you.
Wow, well, I guess that video wasn't so short in the end, but if you've made it this far, thanks a lot for watching. Big shout outs to the band, the Strictly Smokin Big Band. Let's just finish with another clip from the band, and hopefully you'll join me next time. Thanks again.
I love the theater, but never go late. I never bother with people I hate. That's why the lady is a child. And the player's gonna play, 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 play. The hater's gonna hate, 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 hate. Baby, I'm just gonna shake, 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 shake. Shake it off, shake it off. Heartbreak is gonna break, 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 break. And the faker's gonna fake, 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 fake. Baby, I'm just gonna shake, 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 shake. Shake it off, shake it off. Yeah, it's pretty clear. I ain't no size 2, but I can shake it like I'm supposed to do. I got that boom, boom, that all the boys chase. All the right colors in all the right places. You've seen those magazines, working that Photoshop. You know that stuff ain't real. Come on now, make it stop. If you got booty building, then bring it up. Every inch of you is perfect from the bottom to the top.